Hi everybody, this is Jan for Chess24. In this video we take a look at the encounter between the world champion and the vice world champion, the world number 1 and the world number 2. Magnus Carlsen, the world champion with the black pieces, faces Fabiano Caruana. And Carlsen has not had a great event as they meet in round number 10 of the Tata Steel Masters in Weichensee in the Netherlands. Carlsen only has 5 points out of 9 games, which for his standards is not great, while Caruana has 6 points out of 9 games, is in the shared lead. And with a victory against the world champion, he could, of course, help his tournament chances considerably. But no matter what the tournament position, when these two are meeting each other, a lot of prestige is at stake. They've been more or less the established number 1 and number 2 in the world over the last couple of years. Played a very close World Championship match in 2018, and their encounters are always interesting. Magnus Carlsen has had the upper hand recently. He hasn't lost to Fabiano Caruana actually since 2015 in a tournament game, but he's also only won 4 encounters since then, while they drew, I think, 29. So more often than not, they neutralize each other. But I've had the feeling, especially in their latest games, that Caruana has been putting quite a bit of pressure on the world champion with the help of the move pawn to e4. So it's a small surprise that in this game he opts for pawn to d4, which he's of course capable of playing, but he hasn't used against Carlsen in some time. Knight to f6, pawn to c4 and pawn to e6, no surprises there, the main line from the world champion. And Caruana plays the move g3, indicates that he would like to play the Catalan opening. Interesting opening that he has not used that often, I would say, and I don't think he's ever used it against Carlsen. He's played a few Catalans in the Candidates tournament, but recently we've seen Caruana do more knight c3, allowing the Nimzo Indian, or knight to f3, and after d5 choose his line. So pawn to g3, Carlsen goes d5, knight to f3, and now the world champion took some time, actually already for d5, trying to figure out what Caruana wanted and how maybe to avoid unpleasant surprises in this Catalan. After some thought, he settled on bishop b4 check, which is a move he's played recently against Daniel Dubov, among others. But after bishop d2, the main move, Carlsen this time around goes for bishop to d6. Not bishop e7, which is more popular, or a5, which also has gained a following recently. But bishop goes back to d6, and you might ask yourself, why provoke this bishop to d2 and not go bishop d6 directly? The reason is this bishop is often somewhat misplaced on d2 and would rather be on c1. If it's on c1, white can go knight c3, knight d2, then push for e4. He can use this square for the knight, and he can potentially fianchetto this bishop by going b3, bishop b2. While on d2 it's often a little clumsy, so it's a well-known technique in the Catalan to provoke this bishop to go here. Bishop g2 by Caruana. Knight c3, castles, bishop g5 used to be all the rage here for a while, but engines are saying bishop e7. Not much is happening, so this trend is over. Bishop g2, back in business. Carlsen plays the move pawn to c6, keeping his options open and also hinting at the idea to play knight to e4 followed by f5, building his beloved stone wall, a line which he quite likes and which he's done a video series on Chess24 about. He does not start with knight to e4 directly because then knight c3 could maybe challenge this construction, be a little unpleasant. But after c6, it could be a topic, so Caruana plays knight to c3, taking control of that square. And here Carlsen castles, which looks like the most natural move in the world. But I believe you could make a case arguing that this is a small inaccuracy and that it should be replaced by knight bd7. The difference we can see in the game. In the game after castles, Caruana plays bishop g5. As I mentioned, this bishop isn't doing much on d2 anyway. Pinning, and at the same time threatening e4. Now, if black were to play knight bd7 now, white would go e4. and clarify the situation in the center in his favor. This is a pleasant position for white. So in order to get rid of this bishop on g5, you play h6, as Carlsen also does in the game, but now after bishop f6 he has to recapture with the queen, which is clumsily placed. Of course black gained the 2 bishops, but the queen is misplaced here and it won't be easy to fight the fight for the center with Her Majesty here. Now all of this could have been avoided if you start with knight bd7 instead of castles, and now after bishop g5 black is in time to play h6, bishop f6, knight f6, which is a much more harmonious setup. So I believe maybe knight bd7 instead of short castles is the way to go. Anyway, castles is played, this whole thing happened, takes, and queen to b3 from Caruana. He does not want to go e4 directly, because then takes, followed by bishop b4 check. Bit of a nuisance. And queen b3, of course, also helps covering the c4 pawn. Well, you know, potentially. Threatening e4, playing to castle, keeping his options open. Favorite of Fabiano Caruana's to put his queen on b3 in these Catalan positions. Knight d7, very natural, anticipating white's e4, which can now be well met by d takes c, followed by pawn to e5. This is a typical theme that we will see over the next couple moves. Caruana doesn't want that, he goes short castles, and Carlsen, after some thought, aims for the move queen to e7, sidestepping any e4 and being attacked by this knight, but also losing a little bit of time. Computers are indicating that rook d8, in their opinion, is also a good move, when e4 can once again be met by d takes c, and if c5, if this bishop gets attacked, can now retreat to the f8 square. Still, queen e7 is natural. And once again, e4, d takes c, nothing special at all. This looks fine for black. So Caruana has to find a way to get in e4 without allowing this counterplay. And he does. He starts with c5, targets the bishop, bishop c7, and now pushes pawn to e4. These structures are tricky. Generally, black does not want to take here without having any concrete follow-up, because if things stabilize, more often than not, black just gets stuck with a bad bishop on c8 that can't really contribute to the game. And trying to open the position here with e5, more often than not, backfires. Rook e1, knight h4, it's just too dangerous. Therefore, d takes e4 is not to be recommended, and Carlsen also very quickly chooses a different move. He plays pawn to b6, tries to undermine the structure on this side. If white had to take here, c takes b, a takes b, or knight takes b6, any recapture really, black would get a very decent structure. Caruana has different things in mind. He goes for e takes d, which, by the way, might not be the most critical move. The most critical might be the move queen to a4, just targeting the c6 pawn. If b5, queen c2, then black hasn't achieved his goal. And if bishop b7, there's a very concrete line shown by Peter Leko in the live broadcast. Takes, rook to e1, queen d8, and knight takes d5. Little trick. C takes d, c6. Thanks to this double attack, white regains the piece with a bit of an advantage. Bishop to c8, c takes d, queen d7 is the best defense black had. But he will suffer here. Queen b3, the knight comes to e5, and the black position is a little off. The white rooks will quickly occupy the open file, so the open e file. This would have been unpleasant. It's not clear if Carlsen had anything better after this move queen a4. Maybe he had to, with a heavy heart, capture this pawn now, d, knight e4, and play bishop b7, at least giving this bishop some work, but still a position that does look pleasant for white. Caruana has a different idea in mind. He goes for a direct opening of the position with e takes d5. Very natural as well. Black can't really play c takes d, because then pawn to c6. Asks some unpleasant questions, like why did you let that pawn to c6? And e takes d allows rook to e1, gaining a tempo, attacking the black queen. In this position, Carlsen almost a tempo played a move that I thought was good in the live broadcast as well. Queen f6, but this move does have a tactical flaw, and it would have been more prudent to play queen to d8. After which, nothing dramatic has happened. The position is roughly equal. I guess queen a4 is still a topic, and now pawn to b5 or queen to f6 seem reasonable. So queen f6. Do you have any idea what could be wrong with this move? If you want to do some tactics training, you can pause the video here and try to figure out how white to move wins a pawn with a little combination. Fabian Caruana does not miss such chances, and he goes for it with knight takes d5, c takes d5, queen takes d5, sacrificing a knight, but we will see that this is only a short-term sacrifice, since the rook is under attack. You can't cover it with bishop a6 because then the knight on d7 falls, so you have to move it to the side. And now we see the point of Caruana's combination. He follows up with c6 and says, "Excuse me, does your knight have any good squares, sir?" The answer is no. That knight is trapped. Carlsen has to return the piece, and once the position clarifies here, black is a pawn down and has to fight for survival. Not exactly what Carlsen was dreaming of, but Caruana, with his next move, I believe, makes his task somewhat easier. Caruana goes knight to e5, which looks very, very natural, stopping bishop c6, freeing this bishop, opening the position, but it does allow a concrete follow-up, which Carlsen goes for. That makes his position somewhat more manageable. I'm not sure if white's winning chances were much greater after rook to c1, but it does look like this move puts more pressure on the black position. Stopping bishop c6, attacking this. Bishop goes away, bishop d6, and now some move a3 is what the computers indicate, but many other options are possible too. Black is a pawn down. He does have the two bishops, and this white d-pawn is not exactly queening, so it's very possible that with best play, black should hang in here as well. But it feels to me like this was a more challenging choice than Caruana's move, which looks much more natural, 95. Carlsen goes bishop e6, attacks the queen, queen to e4, and here we arrive at a very critical strategic moment where Magnus Carlsen plays the move bishop takes e5, which, I don't know, to him probably is obvious. To me, this move is far from obvious. Because you give up the bishop, and you also improve white's pawn structure. White recaptures with the pawn, and now his pawns are connected. So it would seem like white is a clear pawn up, which at the highest level is usually an excellent winning chance. And you would think, I need good technique, but I should convert this extra pawn. This is where the world champion's expert judgment comes in, though. He's understood he's not in great danger here, although he's a clear pawn down. All his pieces are active. This rook can come to d2, the other rook can come to c8, c2, or back up its colleague. The bishop on e6 has good things to do, keeping an eye on the a2 pawn. And for white, his bishop on g2 is not doing all that much currently, and it's also pretty hard to get his majority rolling. Because after f4, there will usually be g6. It's going to be very hard to make it past that square. Still, white is a healthy pawn up, so clearly it's black fighting for survival here. But I do think that Carlsen judged this pretty expertly, that he's not in too much trouble. Caruana, who's also a bit of a chess expert, plays queen e3, intending to give this bishop some work, clearing the e4 square, from where it covers important squares like c2 and d3, while on g2, as mentioned, it wasn't doing very much. And once again, world championish understanding here on display. He plays the move queen to c5, saying, you know what, even without queens, I'm not worried. We can exchange queens, which is not typical when you're a pawn down. Typically, you would, I don't know, play a move like queen b4 and try to make something happen with the queens. but Carlsen understands. He can afford to exchange queens, and nothing too bad can happen to him. Takes, pawn to f4. Pawn to g6. This is important. Black should not go active yet with rook to d2, because that runs into rook to d1. If takes, black gets a little greedy. It's the good old back rank checkmate. So pawn to g6, not only stopping f5, but also giving this king a much needed square on g7. And once again, it turns out that black, even playing slowly, has enough for the pawn here. Caruana plays king f2, as he should, stopping rook d2, because now it can be met by rook to e2. Carlsen just goes a5, grabs some space here, saying, you know what, you still have these issues on the queen side to solve. I ain't worried about nothing. King e3, pawn to a4, grabs more space. If white goes a3 here or at any moment, which looks natural, rook b5 comes when rook b3 or rook b2 are issues, especially. This weakened square on b3 would be a problem, so you don't go a3. Caruana plays rook e to c1 instead. Excuse me. And Carlsen correctly keeps the rooks on the board, goes rook to b5. You don't want to exchange too much. You do want to keep the rooks here so that they can target the white queen side. Rook to c2. Rook to b4. Little trap. If white goes a3 now, what does black do? Correct. Rook e4, king e4, bishop f5. Picks up a piece. So bishop d3, the bishop goes away to parry that threat. Pawn to h5. Another instructive move, just making very hard for white to ever gain space on the king side. Rook to d2. Pawn to b5. Well, these moves might be simple for the world champion. None of this is obvious to me. I'd be guessing a lot if I should advance these pawns. But he's understood that white can't really free himself. If white plays a3, then the rook gets this square on b3, from where it will bother the white pieces. If white doesn't play a3, this rook can't move, because a2 is under attack. The bishop would take it. This bishop can't really move, because then... because then the rooks will get exchanged and b2 would fall. So white really can't do very much. The king is already placed perfectly. The rook just went here. There's not that much for white to do. And Caruana, of course, realizes that, goes pawn to a3, rook to b3, and rook to c1. A clever idea, intending to play rook c3. Exchange this very active enemy rook. But Carlsen has also anticipated that, and here we see the point of b5. He has planned operation. Free the c3 square. Starts with pawn to b4. A takes b. Pawn to a3. B takes a. And now this rook can no longer go to c3 to fight against this very active enemy rook. And that means black has time to go bishop f5 without worrying about rook c3. He's currently 3 pawns down. But doesn't matter. White has to cover this bishop, rook to d1. Rook takes a3, and this pin just means that white can't really undertake anything active in the near or distant future, really. The good news for white is he's 2 pawns up, and this pawn can always be used as a decoy, so it's not like black could cause any trouble here. And Carlsen says, you know what, I've defended well after my early problems, and I will now clarify the situation. Repeat moves. I will chase your rook away from d1. If that moves, I will attack your bishop. If you cover it, I will chase it again. And we shall make a draw. So, good defensive effort by Magnus Carlsen after getting in trouble out of the opening. Mainly, I think, due to... 2 moments. One, after knight c3, maybe castle is not ideal, and knight bd7 is more circumspect. And then the other was the situation after rook fe1, where queen d8 might have been more prudent than queen f6. After that, Caruana spots this nice combination, wins a pawn, puts pressure, but maybe knight e5. Let Carlsen a little bit off the hook. Thanks for watching this encounter between the world number 1, world number 2 in the cross table. This draw means that Caruana obviously maintains good chances in the tournament. At the time of recording, not all the other games had finished yet, so let's have a look. Caruana on 6.5, but he could still be caught by Alireza and Anish Giri, whose games were still running. The world champion sort of stuck on +1, 5.5. Will be very hard for him to join the fight for first place with 3 more rounds to go. Is it 3? I think so. 11, 12, 13. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next Game of the Day video, or maybe in the live broadcast.